What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We are always live as well on the free Odyssey app, and we are streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. A lot of random stuff going on today in terms of the stories that we're following. We got the Commanders' ongoing search for a wide receiver 2. How will they go about that search? Will they even in earnest go about that search? And also, what are the options as Chris Godwin and the Bucs apparently are getting closer to a deal? We'll give you the latest on that about 10 minutes from now. Clint Yates on the show a little bit later. Jesse Doherty wrote a really great story on the ever-evolving world of college sports that we'll talk to him about a little bit later. And at 5 o'clock, the NFL announced its salary cap today, or a range, and it's higher than expected. So what's that mean for the league? What's that mean for Washington? JI Halsell joins us, NFL agent and salary cap analyst for Not My Beat at 5 o'clock. But we start today talking about another kind of, like, there's no main story today in terms of, oh, we must talk about this. There's a bunch of things happening that all could affect the Commanders. Obviously, the salary cap stuff directly affects Washington in the most obvious of way. You have to be pretty silly not to figure out, oh, hey, the salary cap's bigger. That affects Washington. Does that affect the Commanders? No, the Commanders were actually going to use the old estimate no matter what. No, of course it affects Washington. The cap this year will be about $22 million higher. Great. And again, we'll talk to JI at 5 about what that means. And how much higher that is, not than 2024, which is kind of irrelevant. It's how high did we think it was going to be? And as the team plans, like, what other kind of space is available. So that's one thing. But this one might have slipped past you as something that you need to pay attention to as a Washington fan. The Chargers are going to open next season in Sao Paulo. The Eagles and the Packers, of course, played the first ever NFL game in Brazil this season. They wound up rematching in the playoffs, and then obviously the Eagles went on to win the Super Bowl. So if season starts in Sao Paulo, ends in the Super Bowl, excellent, love that. I can't remember if the Eagles were designated as the home team or whether they were the away team, but the Chargers are the designated home team, and the Commanders are on the Chargers schedule as an away game. So I tend to think that Washington is not going to open the season on Sunday next year, unless they open on a Sunday night with, I don't know, do they go Ben Johnson's first game with the Bears against the Commanders, and the Commanders get to host Sunday Night Football in the Hail Mary rematch? Like, that could be a thing, because I believe the Bears are on the schedule next year because the NFC North is on the schedule. So that could be an option for Sunday, or frankly the Monday nighter. But I look at the first two games that are going to be played on the NFL schedule next year, and why wouldn't you want Jaden Daniels either playing the Eagles at home on Thursday night in a Super Bowl rematch, or playing in Brazil against the Chargers? You get Herbert versus Daniels, Harbaugh versus Quinn, two kind of very similar up-and-coming type of teams that way outperformed expectations last season, squaring off to start their seasons in Brazil. It just seems too juicy to pass up if you're the NFL to do this for one of these games. And again, are there other options? Sure. Obviously, the Eagles cannot play in Sao Paulo again because they're opening at home on Thursday. But if the Chargers have, I don't know what the Chargers' other road opponents are. That probably was something I should have looked up before the show, something I'll look up right now. But let's say if they're playing the NFC East, which they are, which is why the Commanders are on their schedule, the Cowboys are always something the NFL would like to mess with. And I think sending the Cowboys to South America is certainly something that they would possibly have. And if you look at the Chargers, no, I don't want notifications from the Chargers. Just let me look at their opponents. Chargers road opponents. They have the Broncos, Chiefs, and Raiders, the Jags, and the Titans. I mean, if you wanted to send Anthony as punishment to those teams, do you send the Jags or Titans to South America? And if they can't score more than 10 points, they have to stay there.
They have to stay there. It's crazy.
Actually, no, we'll take them back. We're not going to do that to Brazil. That's not very nice. Brazil's Brazil's a lovely place.
I mean, it already sucks that Germany got 2 games of the Jags last year.
Yeah.
So,
and I apologize. So that's the road opponents. So they'll be at Jacksonville, at Tennessee. So the home opponents are the Broncos, Chiefs, and Raiders, the Texans, and the Colts. I could see them doing Texans, Chargers week 1 in Sao Paulo.
I mean,
They kind of did that conference bash thing, and last year too, right? If Packers Eagles is the one template we have, do it Texans, Stroud versus Herbert, like 2 teams that are going to be battling for the AFC playoffs. Can one of them break into that top tier with the Ravens, Bills, and Chiefs? That's appealing. I could see that being a thing.
I just think Jaden Daniels, the attention that he's been given since his rookie season has ended, I just think they're going to do as much as they can to, try to put this guy into prime television spot. So I think Friday to see, him year 2, I think that's as juicy as it gets, just because it's year 2. We don't know if this guy's going to fall into a sophomore slump, but everybody seems to think he's on the up and up. The Commanders are going to be on the up and up. So what better way to, start their season than a Friday night game?
I mean, I could
Brazil.
definitely see it. Like, it's definitely there. By the way, if you want to hear why Jaden Daniels is likely not going to have a sophomore slump, we talked about that to open the mailbag episode of Take Command, which is available now in your podcast feeds from yesterday. So check that out. And then we got Mock Draft 1.0 from Take Command, by the way, coming tomorrow. So check that out. That'll be out first thing in the morning because we recorded it today. But the Chargers' other options, the Steelers are always a draw, I think, for the league, in the same way that the Packers are a draw. So I could see them sending the Steelers there. The Vikings, maybe, for sure. And that's the list, because the Eagles are obviously out. And then they could do their divisional opponents, which I think is also a possibility. Any of them, frankly. Broncos, Chiefs, Raiders are a little bit harder sell, but Pete Carroll's first game, etc. So I think it's interesting. And then when you look at Washington, how could they open up week 1? I mean, if they want to give Washington a home game, they could have them host the Bears in Ben Johnson's first game, Caleb versus Jaden part 2. They can do, obviously they can't host the Eagles week 1, but they could be at the Eagles for sure. They could host the Cowboys. They could host the Giants. That's always going to be a big deal. And the Giants might have a rookie quarterback. So is that something that is appealing to the NFL for whatever reason? And then they have the Lions at home as well. So do you get the NFC divisional round rematch? That's a possibility. I don't know that they would make them open on the road. But if you wanted a marquee Sunday or Monday night game, you could put them at Atlanta. That was a big game last year. Penix in year 2. At Kansas City. At Green Bay. At any of the division opponents. So, the Dolphins are kind of a sexy team. Like, the Commanders' schedule, Vikings, they could do that. J.J. McCarthy versus Jaden Daniels, or you'll see where Darnold's at. But, like, that's the thing, is because the Commanders are the Commanders, I can make an argument for basically any game on their schedule to say that is worthy of a prime time, anytime, but especially week 1 type of deal. But specifically some of the storylines of the rematch of, the last Sunday night game of last season was the Falcons-Commanders game. They got flexed in, and the Commanders win the division. What if they say, Tarico Collinsworth, you're opening Sunday night again. You're going back to Washington. Or sorry, you're actually going to go to Atlanta and get the rematch of that. I could make that argument. So while I think a lot of people are circling that Sao Paulo game for the Commanders to potentially be on the road, I don't think it's a lock by any stretch of the imagination. But would I be surprised if the NFL was like, that's the team we want to feature? Of course not. Of course not. Because Jaden, I can almost guarantee that Jaden and the Commanders are going to be maxed out. I think 6 is the maximum allowed primetime games. I bet you they got 6. Yeah. Who's Jaden going to be throwing to in those games? Terry, got it. Beyond that, we're not quite sure. What are the options that are going to exist for this team at wide receiver 2? And realistically, how much should they spend there? We're going to talk about that, break it down next on The Hoffman Show. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube too at the Team 980. The Washington Commanders need more wide receivers. I don't just say that as like a, hey, that's analysis, baby. Hey, they got to find someone to help Terry McLaurin. No, they only have two on the roster. They legitimately only have two guys from the end of the season. Now, they might have like a Bryson Tremaine or whoever is on like a futures contract or whatever, and you know, UDFA or practice squad type guys that are going to help fill out the 90. But in terms of like bona fide NFL wide receivers that they have moving forward, Luke McCaffrey and Terry McLaurin are the only two guys that they have. They could certainly look at bringing back Noah Brown. They could certainly look at bringing back De'Ami Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, Jameson Crowder, on down the list. But any guy you name that played in burgundy and gold last year, they have to re-sign outside of McCaffrey and McLaurin. And by the way, McLaurin certainly might have a case to get an extension, and it might behoove them to do the extension now versus next season. So they have contracts to work out with basically everybody. And that really begs the question of, okay, well, what realistically do they do at that position? What is the best path forward? And this comes amidst multiple news pieces that are relevant. Three, really. One, we covered in depth yesterday. T. Higgins gets the franchise tag from Cincinnati. I'm going to say that all but takes him off the board. That's going to cost, not that you have to pay the 2 firsts or whatever the thing is. Like you work out the deal between the two teams. But you're going to have to give up draft capital and a big contract to T. Higgins. I don't think that it's worth. I love T. Higgins as a player, and I love T. Higgins here as a player. But I don't think it's going to be worth outbidding a bunch of other teams where he is going to say, yes, I'm good with that trade, and the draft capital to make the Bengals okay with it. And that plus his injury history is enough to where I'm like, I'm good. If I could pay T. Higgins somewhere in the $25 million a year range, for reference, I think Justin Jefferson's getting 34. So if I can pay him somewhere in the 25, and he probably deserves 27, 28, to be clear. But if I can somehow get him in the 25, 26 million range for, let's say, 3 to 4 years, and it costs me a singular second-round pick, if you tell me I get T. Higgins with my second-round pick, I'm okay with it. So I would probably do that, but I don't know that the Bengals are going to go for that. I think they're probably going to want multiple picks, and I think the wide receiver market is going to be hot enough that there's going to be someone else that's willing to give him closer to 30 and give up probably a better second-round pick, because that's the other thing, too. Let's say the cost is a second-round pick. If you're the Bengals, do you want the Patriots' second-round pick, which is 4 picks after the or 5 picks, something like that, after the Commanders' first-round pick, or do you want the Commanders' second-round pick that is very close to the Patriots' third-round pick? So I think that is something that is worth considering on all fronts. Today, the Bucs announced that it was reported that the Buccaneers are extending the contract void date for Chris Godwin, which extends their negotiating window. As we saw yesterday, 2 days ago, with the Panthers and Andy Dalton, who they agreed to a new deal. You can re-sign your own free agents right now, but there are certain dates that become important based off the individual contracts. And the Bucs had a date that was expiring with Godwin where he was 100% going to free agency if they didn't tag him. And instead, they've extended that window, worked with Godwin, because they're probably working on a long-term extension. So that takes Chris Godwin, wide receiver 2 on the free agency board, off the market. Then you have the reality that the wide receiver market is kind of crazy. Anthony, how well do you think Darnell Mooney, wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, how do you what'd you make of him last year?
I think he was pretty good.
Yeah, he was pretty solid. Who was more important, him or Saquon Barkley to the Eagles?
Saquon.
How much different do you think their salaries were?
I think Saquon probably would have made a little bit more, maybe like 3 or 4 million, because he only got 12.
They were $13 million a year players.
Oh, wow.
Both of them.
Same money.
Same exact money. So on the free agent market, you can get a Saquon or you can get a Darnell Mooney. And so when you look at De'Ami Brown, for instance, who had a really nice couple of playoff games, and I think got way better with the opportunities that he got later in the season, and proved that He's not a top tier wide receiver 2 by any stretch, but like he can do that for you in a pinch. And depending on what else you got, if you have a good wide receiver 3 and like they can be kind of 2A, 2B rotating around, will someone convince themselves that De'Ami Brown is worth paying Darnell Mooney money? Maybe. I think it's definitely possible. That his vertical speed, what he ran at the combine, 4.45, the whole deal, showed that he had great, ability to catch the ball through a hand in his face from Jaden in the Lions game and made some tough catches. His run after the catch, like all that stuff. Will someone convince themselves that De'Ami Brown is worth Darnell Mooney money? Maybe. Would you rather spend $13 million on De'Ami Brown or $10 million on Zach Ertz? I'd rather spend $10 million on Zach Ertz.
Yeah.
And knowing that that's probably a
offense.
1-year deal where I'm like, God, I'm going to have to pay De'Ami $13 million. Like, is he looking at a 3 for $40 type of deal? Right? So I think that is the question in terms of, okay, if you're paying for a top guy, if you're paying for Chris Godwin, you're getting Chris Godwin. That level of certainty is worth paying for. That's part of the problem for Higgins is I know when he's on the field, he's going to be awesome, but his injury history suggests he might not be on the field for more than 12 games a year. Once you get into the we're projecting market, I just rather project on draftable guys because I'd rather pay that guy $1 million, $2 million, and then go bargain bin shopping and see if I can get someone like the Commanders did last year where they got Olamide Zaccheaus for $1.2 million, then pay, again, I would love for them to re-sign De'Ami if he's actually a $7 or $8 million player. If that dude's getting 13, 14, De'Ami, my friend, go get paid.
Yeah.
We bid you adieu. Thanks for a great finish to what was at times a frustrating career here, but I know it was frustrating for him too. I bet you De'Ami often spends time thinking about, man, what if I just had these coaches the entire time? That quarterback the entire time instead of the nonsense. I mean, I know Sam Howell's this guy, but instead of the stuff that he dealt with and Rivera and whatever, like how different is De'Ami Brown's career if he's got Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury the entire time, who, even though they didn't draft him, figured out, hey, we should maybe throw this guy a screen every now and again. So the question is, if you're the Commanders, how do you address it? 301-230-0980 is the phone number. 301-230-0980. Who are whether you've looked at the free agent class and you know some of the names, some of the draftable guys. There's some guys that I've started to watch a little bit that I'm curious about, some of whom I think will be available at 29. There's other guys that probably won't be, but also I think there's some guys that are intriguing at 61 in the Commanders' second-round pick. So we're going to start throwing some actual names around. So whether it's names or just generalities, how do you want to see them address this position? And the last piece of news, by the way, that I forgot to mention is I believe it was Jeremy Fowler was on ESPN saying he thinks that the money is going to go to the lines, that they're going to try to piece this receiver room together in many ways like they did last year and trust their coaching and their quarterback, make sure that quarterback is protected and the running game is better to support it. So I think that's probably worth mentioning as well. But what say you? 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Your call's next on The Hoffman Show. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We're streaming live on YouTube, too, if you want to watch us there. Comment sections, nice and active today. The phone number, 301-230-0980. Of course, the YouTube at the Team 980. I feel like I got like 3/4 of the way through that sentence and then stopped, Anthony. Sometimes my ADD gets the best of me, and I'm just all over the place.
It happens. It's okay, man.
Thank you. Let's see if I can focus through this because I have something very, very important to tell everybody. Are you ready?
You got something to tell us?
Yeah. Well, you're not eligible, but everybody is.
Oh, come on, man.
I'm so sorry. But if you are not Anthony Haney or anybody else listening that is an Odyssey employee, and you're ready to win big and live it up in Sin City. Actually, I haven't checked the official rules, Anthony. Maybe you are eligible. So, are you ready to win big and live it up in Sin City? It's the Slam Dunk in Vegas on the Team 980. Listen for your chance to win a flyaway trip to Las Vegas with 3 friends and $20,000 in spending money for the first 2 rounds of the college basketball tournament. You'll stay at the Circa Resort and Casino, Las Vegas's premier sports viewing destination, and visit the biggest March hoops party at Stadium Swim. Winning is easy. Just download the free Odyssey app, log in, and listen to the Team 980 for a chance to win the experience of a lifetime. Listen each day for an hour to earn your daily entry. So you listen on the Odyssey app, you're logged in. Once you hit an hour, you are automatically entered in your daily entry. However, this is a national contest, so the competition is stiff. Make sure you get that hour in every single day for more chances to win. And more details, probably including whether Anthony is eligible or not, are available at odyssey.com/slamdunk. So that's where you go, Anthony, to find out if you're allowed to win. Odyssey.com/slamdunk.
I don't think I'll be allowed to win, man.
I don't think you're allowed to win either.
It's okay.
But if your name's not Anthony Haney, and that's just Anthony Haney III, by the way. Your pops, I believe, is actually, I don't know if family members are eligible. I feel like it's probably going to be someone who has nothing to do with Odyssey. Slam Dunk in Vegas. Check it out. Listen to us daily on the free Odyssey app. Okay, our question for now. 301-230-0980 is where you answer it. 301-230-0980. What do you want to see the Commanders do to address their wide receiver room? Terry McLaurin, Luke McCaffrey, currently the only 2 incumbent wide receivers. There are options in the draft. There are options in free agency. The options in free agency seem to be dwindling as T. Higgins has been tagged by the Bengals, and Chris Godwin and the Buccaneers seem to be moving towards a long-term deal. Let's get things started with Mark in Largo, who never has strong opinions. Mark, welcome back to the show.
What's up, Craig? How you doing, buddy?
I'm good.
That's good. I say we take a stab at Darius Slayton because it'll be cheap, and wait for the 49ers to cut Debo. You wait for him to get cut, and then you pick him up. There is a stretch, though, that I kind of said. I've been saying this all day, and I don't think it's a stretch, but I think it would never happen. But you can at least investigate. I would call Philadelphia, see what you can get for Devontae Smith, because I don't think he's happy at all in Philadelia.
Why? What makes you say that he's not happy at all in Philadelphia? They just won a championship.
Let me ask you this: Did you watch the Super Bowl when they were mic'd up? If you watch the Super Bowl when he caught the touchdown in the Super Bowl, he came to the sidelines. I'll never forget. Jalen called him over and said, "We got a lot we got to work on." And Devontae said, "Yeah, we got a lot to work on. And you would think that this is the Super Bowl, man. You're going to win the Super Bowl. You should be happy. Devontae just seemed like he was just not happy. And even when he dropped the pass, when he was playing here, it was like it just brushed off. It wasn't a big deal to him. I just think that, I don't think, look, just because you won the Super Bowl and you're not getting everything going, I think there's something in play there.
Here's what I'll say about the Philly thing, and then I do want to talk about the other 2 names you mentioned because I think obviously those are more realistic. For a million reasons, but when guys win rings, sometimes that actually is the thing that sets them free, where it's like, well, now I got the ring. Now let me go see what I can do somewhere else. Like, you think about Tyreek in Kansas City, where he's like, well, now I want to go get paid, and I want to be the feature of the offense in a way I'm probably not going to be as long as Travis Kelce is around. The thing is, the one difference I will say for the Philly guys is Tyreek was on his rookie deal. He wanted the get paid part was the most important thing, and the Chiefs had to make a tough decision.
Devontae was on his rookie deal.
Devontae Smith is not on his rookie deal. He's been paid.
Okay.
And so is A.J. Brown.
Right, he's been paid. Right.
So that does complicate that factor of, one, you're acquiring the salary. Two, is Howie really going to trade one of those two dudes in the division? And I know that they did business during the draft last year, but trading draft picks versus already established players, that's a very different thing. And what is that price? Okay. So I hear, look, if they become available, should Washington inquire? Yes, absolutely. If you can acquire a great player from a division opponent that helps you and hurts them, even if you're going to give them something they want, that clearly is something that's worth investigating. But I want to, Mark, thanks for the call. As always, appreciate it. The other two names you mentioned are the ones that include one that's really interesting to me. I love the idea of going after Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton's been playing in New York. He is seemingly always underused. Now, maybe I'll watch more tape of him, and I got to go back and watch like actual film of Darius Slayton to have a stronger opinion, and I'll do that sometime before free agency. But the idea of Darius Slayton is one that I like and one that fits a lot here, because I think one thing that Washington missed at times last year opposite Terry was someone who could stretch the field vertically as well. And when Diami got in there late in the season and he proved that he could do that a little bit more, I was like, oh, I mean, the Detroit game, the tape is wild. To watch the speed, and once Diami like really got going in that offense, the speed at which Diami and Terry could operate across from each other, some of these deep crossing routes, the ability to clear out, have Terry come underneath it, or the other way around, Terry to clear out, Diami to come on a high cross underneath it. Like those speed type of plays that need to happen with guys that run sub 4.45, because if not, the routes take too long to develop, and that's how you get your chunk plays. Those guys that run that sub 4.45 and can make the catches down the field, they're really, really, really important. And Darius Slayton can do that stuff. Now, is he the most complete receiver? No. But he does a lot of stuff really well. He, I think, is not going to cost crazy money. Like, is he going to be as cheap as Olamide Zaccheaus was last year? I don't know. But if you tell me I can get Darius Slayton, I'm trying to think of a guy who would cost like 20, I don't know. Like, would I rather have, and again, we absolutely loved having Diami on the show. I have a lot of admiration for the way Diami stuck with it and do this stuff. So I don't want this to turn into a bash Diami Brown thing. But if somehow Diami Brown is going to be a $12 or $11 million player, a $13 million player, let's say he's 11. Let's even make it the cheapest version, right, in this range. He's 11, and I can get Darius Slayton for 4. I will take that $7 million in savings and apply it to another really good football player, or making sure that I don't lose Ertz or Wagner or Jeremy Chin or one of these other guys I want to re-sign. Give me that $7 million in savings. I'm not going to get $7 million more in production from Diami Brown than I am Darius Slayton. So Slayton is a guy who I love as a target for Washington. Deebo's a different case because Deebo's also so in his own box. Deebo Samuel's position is Deebo Samuel. Like, is he part receiver? Yes. Is he part running back? Yes. Is he jet sweep gadget guy? Yes. Like, he just does so many things. Obviously, he fits what they want from an attitude standpoint because, you know, Adam had him in San Francisco. So as long as his head's still on straight, and I think Adam would have a good feel for that, I think you're fine. And some of the stuff that was going back and forth, I mean, San Francisco kind of jerked him around on the contract stuff the last couple of years. And there was a lot of turmoil in that receiver room when it comes to contracts. So I'm not going to hold too much of that against Deebo. I know when he's out there, he plays really hard. He's super, super physical. And so if they decide that one of the ways they can help Jaden and add some real pop in this offense is to get Deebo, and they're pretty sure that he's still got that, maybe it's 90% of what it was at his peak, but 90% of Deebo Samuel is still a useful piece in an offense, depending on what it costs. Because that's the other thing. Does Deebo want to get paid, or is Deebo going to come here for $10 million and be a really useful piece? Because if that's the case, then I definitely am interested if they cut him. I don't know that I want to give up any draft capital and have to pay him. 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. More of your calls on how the Commanders can supplement their receiving room next. 5 o'clock, we talk to JI Halsell about the NFL's salary cap coming in for a second year in a row, much higher than expected. What's the impact on the league? What's the impact on the Commanders? And for the Commanders, we're looking right now at how they can fill their receiver room. Looks like Chris Godwin, T. Higgins, amongst the options that are going to be off the table for Washington, as Higgins has been tagged in Cincinnati. And Godwin and the Bucs have agreed to move the void date for his contract, which is a very technical thing, but what it allows them to do is have a longer exclusive negotiating window, which they are in right now, and they can hopefully, if they're them, work out a long-term deal to keep Godwin in Tampa. So what are the other options? What are the ones that intrigue you? 301-230-0980. Let's keep things rolling on the phones with Noel in Chicago. Noel, thanks for calling as always. You're on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, Craig. How are you doing? Good afternoon.
Thanks, man. Doing well.
Thank you. I think for the potential wideouts, I'm keeping a close eye on cuts, and I'm really interested in Christian Kirk if he gets cut by Jacksonville, because I think Cliff loves him, and I think he fits the culture of what they're trying to do really, really well. I've always liked Christian Kirk, and I think he'd be a really good number two. I think his contract right now is $24 million. I wouldn't want to trade for him, but if he got cut, that would be awesome. And keeping an eye on Cooper Kupp too. And again, like hoping that he might get cut because I don't want to trade for him either, because that's very, very expensive. So to sign a free agent outright, the only guy that I really like that I would want on the cheap is Tyler Boyd. I think he's a free agent, and he's a big body kind of guy. I don't think he'd be a great number two, but he would be the perfect number three. And I'm just hoping that if either Kupp or Kirk get cut, that we should pounce on either of those two guys immediately. And this is all assuming that we re-sign Zach Ertz. And I think everything else should be, all the energy should be addressed toward rebuilding the defensive line and then adding to the offensive line. So hoping that we do that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great call, and those are some good names, and I think you've got the order of operations right, too. Like, I think re-signing Ertz is critical because I think and it's because he's Jaden's safety blanket, and he was target number two last year. So, Noel, that's a great shout. Thanks for the call. And just to hit on a couple of these names, thanks, dude. Christian Kirk is absolutely someone I would go after, and someone that I would spend, not like he's again, I agree with Noel. I don't want to spend $24 million on him. I don't want to take on his contract. I'm not trading for him, anything like that. But if he gets out on the free agent market and I can get Christian Kirk for 13, 14 million even, I would love to get him closer to 10 to 12. But if he winds up in the 14, 15 million range, I would consider it. He's that talented. And he has the history with Cliff, and where he was awesome for Cliff in Arizona. He can play inside, outside. He has real vertical speed. I think Christian Kirk would be a fantastic fit in Washington. Tyler Boyd is an interesting one as well. Like, when you talk about a guy that you might be able to get when you go bargain shopping, I mean, Boyd last year made like 1 point something million. I mean, this is a guy that was really good in Cincinnati as their number three. He's getting up there in age. That is the only thing. This is going to be his age 31 season. Last year, he started 8 games in Tennessee. He had 57 targets, 39 catches. But he is 6'2", so he's got a little bit of size. And if I'm remembering, these names, I haven't watched all these guys a ton recently, obviously, but my Tyler Boyd file mentally includes that he blocks pretty well and is like very physical. So that seems to fit the mold. And so if you're getting him on the Olamide Zaccheaus deal, like, is he your wide receiver too? No. But as you think about rounding out the receiver room around Terry, around Luke, around whoever else, like, I think that is absolutely a great name to shout out if he becomes available. And I'm pretty sure he's a free agent. I just looked at his contract and now I don't have it up anymore, but I'm pretty sure he signed a 1-year deal in Tennessee last year. So that he should be available now. Just real quickly, the wide receiver class in the draft, and we'll get back to the calls in a second because I know there's some more calls coming in with some other free agent and or trade names. But Shatoria McMillan's the number one guy, not in the Travis Hunter category, right? Hunter's in his own. Is he a DB? Is he a wide receiver? He's just Travis Hunter. Trattoria McMillan, big, tall dude out of Arizona. He's everyone's most people, I should say, his number 2 receiver. Luther Burden III is a real interesting guy. He's got big Curtis Samuel. I think Debo's a bigger body. I think Debo, even going back to South Carolina, like I imagine Debo in that USC uniform, like as a thicker dude than Luther Burden is. I also got questions on I won't say on the character, but like the competitive character front. Like he definitely gets after it, but like sometimes it's out of control. He had one game early in the year where he picked up 2 personal foul penalties in the same game for taunting and just unsportsmanlike conduct nonsense. And I am very curious when I go to the combine next week, if I start asking around on him, if there's some other stuff with him where he might not have the commander tag and thus not be an option for them. Or is that like, no, actually he's super competitive and he will have that tag. So I don't know yet, but Burden, I also don't think is going to be available for Washington at 29. The group that starts to become available for Washington potentially at 29 probably starts with Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. And I actually watched a little bit of him this morning. He's just solid. Like he's not special in any way. At least when I'm watching him, like nothing pops off the tape. He's 6'1", 205, so there's nothing special in terms of the size, weight. He just reliably catches. Like the more I watch him, the more like I get it. He just catches football after football. He has some vertical speed. There's a screen he takes against Marshall for like 70 yards, but no one touches him. He just outruns everybody, but it's against Marshall. And they have one dude who's going to go in the first round. But he's an edge. He's not their defensive backs are not the fastest. So you got him. Matthew Golden, probably off the board before Washington, but who knows? Wide receiver out of Texas, 6 foot, 195. Like, how many 6 foot, 195 guys do they really want? Alec Ayomanor, I'd have to start, apologies, the beast with Dame Brugler and all the pronunciations aren't out yet, so I'm just learning these guys. But he's 6'2", 210 out of Stanford. Okay, like Logan, I talked about him a little bit this morning. Interesting, but not crazy. Logan's big on Jack Beck. A little bit bigger, 6'2", 215, plays like an animal out of TCU. He's interesting. Now we're starting to get in some guys that probably a little rich for 29, but like, are they going to be available at 61? Xavier Restrepo out of Miami, 5'10", 198, but got some more elite traits in terms of the quickness and things like that. Had 1,100 yards his last 2 years at Miami. Jaden Higgins, I know some folks in the YouTube chat brought him up. Bigger guy, 6'4", 215. Now we're talking. Jalen Royals. And then the guy that Logan absolutely loves, got just crazy excited talking about him this morning, is Savion Williams out of TCU. Listed here at 6'5", 225, but he's played some running back. So, like, imagine a Debo Samuel type player, but he's 6'5". And he's still learning receiver on some level, like some of the ball tracking and stuff. But, like, that gets crazy interesting. And then there's some other guys, Isaiah Bond, Tez Johnson, Trey Harris. You're getting more like third-round type of grades. But there are some pieces in this draft that are interesting, but the receiver class is certainly nowhere close to where it was last year, where you had 3 elite dudes at the top and depth way into the third, even fourth round of guys that some teams like really, really, really like. All right, let's keep it rolling on the calls. We got time for maybe one more. Let's go to Reggie in DC. Reggie, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, Craig, love the show as always.
Appreciate it.
I think, man, I think we're putting too much emphasis on like that number, air quote, well, it isn't air quote, but number 2. I think the boy Golden in Texas is a burner. I look at Detroit's offense, right? Look at their skill position. Jameson Williamson is a speedster. He's not going to be running routes. That's St. Brown. So I'm thinking like, okay, if we get somebody that can just take the top off, that if you start to cheat a little bit over to Terry, he's gone, and then you get a good tight end. I thought it was going to be Senate. Maybe it could be that can get that yak after catch and then get a game breaker. It's about, I think you hear all the mocks. It's about 30 running backs that they're talking about that can be, that's going to come in. Give me a game breaker. Give me, again, you're not going to find a Jahmyr Gibbs, but give me somebody like him. And then now we can really focus on the O-line. And Craig, we're cooking. I just need a burner. Somebody that, again, if you make a mistake, he's going to hit his head on the goalpost. A tight end that I love Ertz. I want to keep him, but a tight end that.
But he needs an understudy this year. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, think about like some of the catches Ertz was making, right? A good young tight end, hopefully could have been centered, but would have made probably another 10 or 15 yards after the catch, like the young Ertz in Philly would have done.
Right.
Then that game breaker in the backfield. I think that's the way I would look at it. So I want to look at Ibuka. I like the guy from Ohio State. I like him, but I don't think he's not. I mean, everybody keeps comparing him to Jackson
Smith and Jigba, yeah,
which is a great comparison. But I think the boy Golden maybe going to run about a 4.3.
Well,
and
that's the thing, Reggie, right? And
I
unfortunately, we're up against the clock. I gotta let you run, Reggie. But
okay,
great stuff,
and
definitely look forward to talking to you more as draft season goes here. Like, next week changes everything, right? This time a year ago, if you had told me Xavier Worthy was going to be a first-round pick, I'd been like, I know he's fast, but come on. And then he goes and breaks the combine record in the 40. And it's like, oh, no, if he's got that kind of speed, like 4.3 fast and 4.22 fast are different. That gets you drafted in the first round, right? I mean, think of the kid who had John Ross, who had it before Worthy. He wasn't a first-round receiver. It was like, maybe, I don't know. That dude got a top 10 pick because he broke the combine record, I believe, back in the day for the Bengals. So you've got the testing, which I think, obviously, the 40 is the sexy one. And for receivers, that matters. Like, if Golden goes out and runs a 4.31, that's going to change the conversation around this receiver class. Great. Fine. Let's go see it happen. But you also have the arm length measurements for the O-lineman. Guy that we think has 32.5-inch arms comes out with 34-inch arms. It's like, oh, he's got that kind of length? We can work with that. That dude went from like, guard tackle to like, that dude's a tackle. Let's go get him. In a draft where there's a ton of those guard tackle hybrids. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out, I would say, over the next 2 weeks. Obviously, there's a lot of media that happens in the draft or at the combine early in the week, which is why we'll be there Tuesday, Wednesday. But by the time I get back on Friday, we'll have started to get some of the measurements in and the workouts are starting to begin. And the week after, we'll have all that stuff in and we'll be able to talk about this draft a lot more intelligently. Logan and I did a big mock draft 1.0. We wound up talking about a lot of these names in depth, including a lot of the receivers that you can check out on Take Command. Tomorrow morning is where you catch that in your podcast feed. So make sure you're subscribed to Take Command. Thanks for all the calls. Maybe get back to some more later on in the show. But we're going to keep things moving on the free agency side of it next with maybe the biggest news that we'll get that affects the whole league. The salary cap is in. It is much higher than expected. So what do we do with that information? JI Halsell is an NFL agent and salary cap analyst, and he joins us next. Show. We're on the Team 980. Always live as well on the free Odyssey app. It is hour number 2. And it's time for Not My Beat. Today's top story is that the NFL salary cap is increasing. And when there's cap news, we got one guy we go to.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not My Beat.
JI Halsell is an NFL agent. He's a former salary cap analyst, but he's always nice enough to put the salary cap analyst hat back on when we ask nicely. So when the news broke today that the salary cap was coming in a lot higher than the formulas indicated that it would, we were like, JI, will you please put on your analyst hat? And with us now, JI Halsell. JI, what's up, my guy? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm probably not doing as well as you, though, because not only do you get to talk on the radio and do all that kind of fun stuff, but you're an active NFL agent, and now your players have more money that they can make. So today's like a great day for agents, right?
Oh, no, absolutely. Like, particularly next week as we go into the combine and those conversations where the legal or illegal start happening around free agency and market values, the fact that we've got a better sense for what the salary cap increase is going to be and how big of an increase it's going to be are going to be helpful for those conversations.
For sure. And so let me ask you this, because obviously we're going to spend most of our time talking about how this might affect Washington here. But is this actually like a bigger deal for the teams like the Patriots or the Commanders that have a ton of cap space? Or is this a bigger deal for teams like the Saints who are at the bottom of the available space? And in fact, they are underwater in terms of the salary cap.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think if you're the Saints as an example, and this is an annual kind of rite of passage for the New Orleans Saints in terms of restructuring deals to get salary cap compliant. But, any increase that you get to the salary cap that is beyond what was projected is helpful for them. Now, when you're a team like the Commanders, it just gives you a little more flexibility. And when you look at kind of your off-season planning, particularly from a cap management standpoint, it probably doesn't move the needle materially, though, in terms of how you're going to approach the offseason. But, there's definitely a little more wiggle room without a doubt.
So for the agents entering these conversations with an Adam Peters, with whoever the exec is, and you're talking about the money that you want your guy to make, is this something where you're saying, I think that this guy deserves the same percent of salary cap as this deal when it was signed? Is it about the actual dollar figures? Like, how do those conversations go down? And then how does this news today ultimately affect that? I would assume it affects it a lot more if there's a percent of cap conversation happening.
When you're on the agent side of the business, you're always trying to find something that is truthful that you can hang your hat on as you try to frame your argument for why your client should make more money, right? And you can try to, peg it to, okay, if the salary cap is going to be hypothetically $279.5 million, then given that increase, well, now that's what my player's market value relative to what his peers made last season should get. And now the club doesn't have to buy into that. The club may say, go kick rocks. We got another player who's going to take our offer. And so, it's just another data point as you try to make your argument for your client to make as much money as possible.
So the other big thing that I was kind of curious about, I was having this conversation actually with somebody this morning, is what you as an agent care about and what the team cares about are very interrelated, but in some ways they're not the same, right? The team, and this assumes that you don't have an owner who's breathing down your neck about actual cash spending, which there's a range of that, which is a whole separate conversation. But mainly the general manager or the decision maker, the contract person on the team side is concerned about the salary cap. They want to know, how do we make this deal good for us in a way that we can sign more players and win more football games? That is the purest version of their side of the argument, where you are going, I want to make my player as much cash as possible. So how does the structure of deals ultimately enter the equation? And how much do you as an agent, once you guys have agreed on a cash number, how much do you care about how the structure of the deal works to get your player that cash, while also, help making sure that the team feels good about the deal, or not even feels good about the deal, but will agree to the deal because it works for them as well?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great question, because the two important words that you just hit on in the question are cash and structure, right? And I always try to frame conversations, whether I was on the club side or now on the agent side, is how do we do a deal that is a win-win for both club and player, right? And oftentimes as an agent, I generally don't care about your cap situation, right? And I would tell you that most clubs appreciate that I don't care about their cap situation because they're like, look, that's what I need to worry about. You don't need to worry about. You just need to worry about your client. Okay, cool. But let's agree on a cash number, and however you need to structure it to kind of fit your cap situation, so long as it makes sense from a total value standpoint or from a cash flow standpoint, you can structure it however you need for your cap management. But I need for my player to get the proper market value in this deal. And so that's often how you come to a win-win deal. The club gets kind of their structure, player gets the value that they're looking for, and the guarantee, most importantly, that they're looking for.
JI Halsell, NFL agent, Three Stripes Sports, and a cap analyst, although technically a former cap analyst, but for at least these 15 minutes, he's a cap analyst for us, breaking this all down today for Not My Beat on the Hoffman Show. So let's take a player as an example if we can. Like the Commanders, I think, are going to want Zach Ertz back. He was so good to them. He wants to be here. He's talked about how he wants to play for Cliff the rest of his career. But if you look at the season he had, and some of the other recent tight end deals, we're talking about a $10 million at least deal probably for Zach Ertz. A, does that sound right? And B, like if you're looking at it from the club side, how do you make that work if you are Adam Peters piecing together your offseason?
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where you have to marry up on the club side of this, you got to marry up the budgetary cap commitment against the internal pro scouting of the player's contribution on the field, right? And what we expect that to be into the future. And now, yes, Zach Ertz's age does play into that calculus. But when you look at the tight end market, and yeah, you've got guys, Taysom Hill, Noah Fant at $10.5 million per year. Some would say that Zach Ertz relative to the Washington Commanders is probably more valuable to the Commanders than Noah Fant on the Seahawks. And so the question then becomes, well, Evan Ingram's at $13.75 million. He's 31 years old, although he was probably 29 when he did that deal 2 years ago. How does he compare, Zach Ertz compare? And if maybe we do get him in that $13 million per year range, well, most importantly, particularly with a player of his age, maybe the guarantee just isn't going to be as high. But for as long as you're here, for as long as you're healthy, we're going to structure it such that we will pay you $13 million per year for as long as you're here, for as long as you're active on game days. And so you get, from an agent perspective, you get the total value you're looking for, but the club gets the insurance or the protection that they're not guaranteed to paying a guy whose production has declined.
And in terms of the fight between the club and the agent over guarantees versus the incentive laden, because I think it's really easy for fans to chime in and be like, I'll give Zach Ertz $13 million if he plays like he did last year. Just got to earn it, incentives. And if I'm Zach's agent, I'm like, no, how about you kick rocks? Is it just simply a market thing where, like, if you have $13 million, it's more guaranteed over on team X, and I'm talking to team Y, like, hey, we got this deal. Like, do you want to match it or not? Is it that simple, or are those conversations more complex? What other factors go into that?
Yeah, no, it does sometimes come down to that. Like, okay, well, we've got this other offer. Can you match it? When you get to free agency, sometimes it does become just a bidding war. Right. But then on the agent side of this, as you talk with your client may really like, in this example, the Washington, D.C. area. Right. And want to stay there and not move to another city and learn a new scheme, a new organization, so on and so forth. And so you got to have, I tell people all the time who aspire to work on the agent side of the business that we often get hung up, or the attention gets paid to the conversation between agent and team on behalf of the client. But what we don't talk about is kind of the negotiation between agent and client to ensure that we're all on the same page, right? And so, like, that, depending upon how that conversation with your client goes, will really dictate kind of whether or not you're willing to give a little bit on certain aspects of a proposal, or if you're going to dig your heels in or not.
JI Halsell with us for another few minutes here on the Hoffman Show. So the other conversation that we've really been having today, JI, on the show, is about what the Commanders do at wide receiver 2, because the wide receiver market is super interesting. You have a guy like this is the example I've been using to illustrate the value of certain positions here. Darnell Mooney signs for $13 million last offseason. So does Saquon Barkley. Like the wide receiver 2 market is really expensive. And this draft, people are kind of all over the place on what they think. There's some guys that they like, but it's certainly not as deep as last year. Do you think that we see any kind of market correction? And how does that affect, a guy like, say, De'Ami Brown, who's entering this market now, looking for as big of a payday as he can coming off of his rookie deal?
I don't know that you see a market correction in the wide receiver market. You may see a market correction in the running back market, right? When I think Najee Harris is going to be really interesting to see what he can get, in free agency. The wide receiver market has exploded. I mean, you got a guy like a Deontay Johnson who spent, time this past season on like 3 different teams, and he's making $18 million per year, right? And I've always kind of wondered this about the wide receiver market is that you can find wide receivers in the draft, and yet this market has exploded, and you kind of use that argument against the running backs, like, oh, we're not going to pay running backs because you can always find running backs in the draft, yet, and so as a result, we don't pay those guys. So to your question regarding wide receiver 2 in Washington, I think the question becomes, you've seen the Philadelphia Eagles do a great job of this, of kind of extending guys early before, maybe they hit their peak value. Like, when you look at using the Eagles actually as an example, and you look at Devontae Smith as an example. He's a guy who they could have waited until this offseason to pay him, but it would have been more expensive, right? And so as the Commanders can try to get ahead of the curve a little bit with their extensions, you're going to find that you're going to get these guys at a cheaper price point. Alternatively, you try to find their backfill in the draft.
Yeah, which is going to be interesting because I think Josh Harris will go for that strategy, but it also takes an owner that's like, well, hey, he's got another year on his rookie deal. Why can't we just let that play out? It's like, well, because then he's going to cost more next year.
It's more expensive.
Yeah, Jeffrey Lurie is just like, just extend him as soon as possible. We'll win more games that way. We'll make up the cash there. And that is the correct thing, as they just won the Super Bowl and are probably raking in all kinds of, souvenir money and merchandise money and all that kind of stuff on all the Super Bowl memorabilia. JI, great stuff as always, sir. Really appreciate you. And hopefully I'll see you next week somewhere in a hallway in Indianapolis.
That's right.
It's that time of year.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You too, bud. Appreciate you. JI Halsell with us here on The Hoffman Show. We'll follow up on that conversation more next. Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. Thanks again to JI Halsell for joining us. Coming up about 10 minutes from now, Jesse Doherty of the Washington Post. Jesse, who you probably remember from when he was on the Nats beat, he's covering college sports for the Post. Plenty of y'all probably read his work on that. But there's a really interesting story as a huge settlement is coming together that is going to help reshape college sports in a major way in terms of like what this new future actually looks like. We've been in the wild, wild west. Now as they're starting to write some of the rules and regulations, different groups are trying to fight for a seat at the table, including the athletes. And Jesse wrote about one particular group that I think is really interesting. Read the story this morning and hit him up and was like, "Yeah, can you come talk about this on the old radio show?" And he was like, "Yes." So we did. But following up on our conversation with J.I., I think it's really good to have a conversation like that this time of year, because it's a reminder that we're dealing kind of with two different numbers, right? We're dealing with one set of numbers that the agents and the players care about. How much money do I make? And for the agents, that is their question. How much money do I make? Because they get a percent of their players' cash number, right? But for the Commanders and the 31 other NFL teams, they are trying to put the jigsaw pieces together in terms of how a deal could actually come together. So I keep coming back to the Ertz one, right? And J.I. mentioned Evan Ingram making 13. So I've been saying, can you get 10 million for Zach? Let's just keep that number. Evan Ingram's making 13, but he signed that deal a couple of years ago. And when he was 29 years old, okay, let's go with Zach. Even if he gets 12, right? I'll use 12. 1 year, 12 million is the core framework of the deal that you want to give, or that Zach Ertz is like, I will take that deal. Sign me up. His agent is like, cool, we will sign on the dotted line. Get back to us. Okay, well, if you make that deal $8 million in a signing bonus, right? So we're trying to get to 12, right? So now his base salary is $4 million, right? But he gets $8 million at signing, and then he gets, oh God, I should have done something in a way that I didn't have to do any math. That's fine. I'll do the math. What I say, Anthony? $8 million signing bonus. So $8 million signing bonus that he gets immediately. He signs the deal. The Commanders say, here's an $8 million check. / they put that money in his bank account, however that works. So then he's got $4 million in base salary remaining. And we're going to divide that by 17 games. He's getting a $235,000 game check every week. Okay, cool. Now, we could also make that $1 million base salary and make the other $3 million roster bonuses. So if he's hurt, that number comes down. But we're just going to keep it simple. And also, if I was Zach, I'd be like, go screw yourself. I played 17 games last year. You're going to pay me this, right? So he's no matter what, going to get $12 million minus the taxes. So whatever that number is. But the Commanders say, okay, technically this is a 1 year, $12 million deal. But the way we're going to structure it, we have a void year. So a second fake season on the contract where there's zero guaranteed money, but that $8 million signing bonus gets prorated over the 2 years. So now we've taken Zach Ertz's cap number at 1 year, $12 million in cash and said the first year he's an $8 million player, $4 million base salary, $4 million half the signing bonus. And in 2026, we're going to take $4 million on our cap that year. And potentially, well, actually, no, that would be it, right? They could sign him to a new deal, and that money's there no matter what. That's the downside of doing that is you now have $4 million in 2026 that is automatically there no matter what. You cannot escape that money. But you brought the number down from 12 to 8. Now, this is where the conversation with JI becomes really interesting. If you are dealing with, I think the number that I could get the Commanders to pretty easily was like 100. Actually, here, let me just go ahead and look it up because I know Over the Cap updated their stuff. So if we go Over the Cap Commanders, which luckily they are not, it's just the Google search that I need to get to their team page. And boy, the internet is working great today. Their team cap space is listed on Over the Cap at $82 million. I believe they can cut John Allen and get into the $100 millions. Yeah, so that 82 plus 16.47. So that gets them to $98 million if Allen's gone. Now, that pushing of $4 million in my fake Zach Ertz contract to next year, that extra cap space, the extra $10 to $12 million, extra $12 to $16 million of cap space that I wasn't expecting to have, maybe I don't sign one extra player at $4 million. Maybe I give myself the flexibility to do more in 2026. Or I move some of those numbers around, that I split that number a little less evenly, or however I want to do it. I was going to push, $5 million into next year. Now I only push $3 million. So I have an extra $2 million to play with. Well, if that $2 million gets me this year's Olamide Zaccheaus, that's a really important $2 million. And so this stuff really matters on the margins, and the contract structures become very interesting. And it's something that I actually, in full transparency, plan on spending a lot more time on studying this offseason, because I think this is going to be really important to the Commanders' future, and I plan on covering them for a number of years to come. And so I want to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty and understand how some of this cash cap, void years, like all these different things work, the roster bonuses versus like what ultimately affects the cap versus what is an incentive number that doesn't affect the cap, because there are those two, right? They're what they're called likely incentives, where you can't just put a bunch of incentives in and be like, oh, if Zach Ertz gets 10 catches, but that's a bonus, so it doesn't count on the salary cap. That's not how it works. So what counts, what doesn't. So there's a lot of nuance and a lot of lawyery type nonsense that goes into this. But mostly I know that you guys listening care about the team side of this and the cap side of it, because that's ultimately what's going to affect winning the football team. Anthony, did we get through that segment without me getting too nerdy and losing anybody?
I think you did a good job of explaining everything.
Thank you. And really, you're the only person that I could have lost, and you looked very locked. I mean, I could have lost many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even
for sure,
in radio land and YouTube land. But you're the only one that can talk back to me right now.
Yeah.
So the YouTube chat, I'm sure, will also talk about. Awesome conversation. I don't know whether that's an old comment, because I haven't been in the YouTube chat. That, as far as I'm concerned, that was about what we just did. It might have been about the conversation with JI, but I'm going to assume it's right here, right now. Thanks, RS Swimmer 84. Okay. And you're a jerk. Anthony just put, I'm lost in the YouTube chat. Anthony, goodbye. When we get back, we're changing gears. We're talking to Jesse Doherty of the Washington Post, why a certain group of athletes is trying to get to the negotiating table with the NCAA and why the NCAA won't let them. Next. all the random schools you could have picked, the fact that you picked Furman, a school that I grew up 30 minutes from, and my dad in his retirement is currently taking classes at for funsies, That's a hell of a pull by you. How did you land on Furman? Jesse Doherty covering college sports for the Washington Post. We used to have Jesse on the show all the time when he was on the Nats beat. The Nats were also worth being on the show then, Jesse, and hopefully one day they'll get back there. But in the meantime, you're doing good stuff and writing about really cool, interesting things. And really, as the college sports world changes, you've been all over it. So appreciate your time here on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
So the story that you wrote that came out yesterday afternoon in the Post, I read it this morning, is about a group of women's basketball players that essentially want a seat at the table as all these new rules and regulations are potentially coming, as there's a huge settlement in play in college sports. They're like, we would like to have a word with how all that gets done. First of all, for the background, like, what's the timing in play here in terms of this gigantic settlement that has happened and the push by any party who wants to have a say on what the world of college sports is going to look like moving forward?
Yeah, so the timing is April is a final approval hearing for the House settlement, which I think when you see it in a Google alert or you see it on Twitter, the big number is $2.6 billion. But that's just back damages. And I say just because what it's really going to do and how it's going to affect industry moving forward is that there's a second component of it where it's going to create a system where schools actually pay athletes directly for the first time ever. To this point, even with NIL, that has not been allowed under NCAA rules. So that's what this House settlement is promising to do should it get approved in April. And then if it is approved, July 1 is sort of the big date for the changing of this sort of system where from that point forward, schools would be permitted to pay athletes through NIL deals to have almost have payrolls really for their rosters in-house. So that's the massive sea change that is likely coming. And I guess the two key months there would be April and July.
So then you have this group of women's basketball players that you've reported on, specifically from the SEC and the Big Ten. How did this group come together, and what are some of the important details of what they are trying to do, and also some steps that they have not taken, specifically unionization?
Yeah, so these players were organized with a group called the UCAA, which is a nonprofit players association, and as you noted there, and I'll get to this specifically, really not a union, and that's really important for this discussion. And I do know a lot of these sort of phrases and words can kind of make eyes glaze over, but they are really important sort of to the inner workings of all this. And what this group did was they formed in the last 6 months or so around sort of common issues like, oh, your coach also pushed you to play through injury, or you couldn't take this class because of your team's schedule, or they wouldn't allow you to do that major because when you transferred your credits for this required course actually didn't really move from this school to the next one. So now you're out of luck and have to major in this. Like, they started to get on Zoom calls and said, well, a lot of these things that we're dealing with are really common. They're not just personal issues. They're really issues that kind of thread across teams and conferences and whatnot. So they get together, they form under this nonprofit players association. And I keep saying that because if this were a union or if the players had gone through, which would have been a much more protracted and longer and more complicated process of unionizing, then under federal labor law, there's a chance in some alternate universe that the SEC and the Big Ten would actually be legally obligated to sit down with these athletes and could face actual repercussions. As it is, there really is no legal reason for the Big Ten or SEC to recognize these groups, to bring them into the decision-making process, to kind of give them that seat at the table. I mean, you could say, of course, well, these are the athletes. They're the labor. They should get that seat. But it's just it's frankly easier, or there's more of a tried path to that when you are a union. So the sort of players association element of it makes it a bit muddy. But essentially, these players sent letters to those commissioners. They got 120 signatures across the letters and all, which is a lot of names. And they said, will you meet with us to explore what a partnership could look like so we could have a voice in plotting the future of college sports and these next steps? And the commissioners just frankly said no.
Jesse Doherty, Washington Post, with us, wrote a great story in the Post. You can read it at WashingtonPost.com/sports about this group of women's basketball players at the college level who are trying to get a seat at the table as the NIL world gets shapen over the next couple of months. As Jesse mentioned just a few minutes ago, there's a House settlement that is currently pushing them on a certain timeline. So it's kind of now or never. So, Jesse, with that, who is making the decisions here? Like, who is at the table if the players are not?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So this House settlement is really being hashed out between the plaintiff's attorneys for the athletes in this case, and then the 6 plaintiffs, and that's the Power 5 conferences. I know the Pac-12 is no longer a power conference, but at the time of the lawsuit it was, and then the NCAA. So the lawyers for those groups, the athletes, and then on the other side, the power conferences and the NCAA are the ones who have really hashed out, this whole settlement. Now, there are working groups within the NCAA. They're in theory talking to other commissioners and ADs and whatnot about how they want this to look and all that. But really, it's a pretty small group that's sort of deciding and negotiating and bargaining over some really, really critical rule changes that would exist then for 10 years. That's the life of the settlement. And while, of course, there's probably room within that to have some changes as sort of the markets evolve, as sports change, et cetera, like the structure that they're talking about that would come about if the settlement is approved is a decade-long structure. So the sort of skeleton of it would be in place for that long. And that's why these are pretty critical discussions. And yeah, that's at the table as of now. So as far as athlete representation, what sort of the devil's advocate argument would be is that the athletes are all part of this massive antitrust class that is represented by Steve Berman and Jeffrey Kessler, these very, very sort of prominent, very successful plaintiffs' attorneys, and that's their seat at the table. And there are sort of meetings with those attorneys, with the athletes, yada, yada. But yeah, there's not actually any direct athlete sitting down or saying, we have a union or representative body or a players association or whatever it may be that is sort of going to represent us specifically. It's through the lawyers on the plaintiff side.
Kessler specifically is like a titan of this field. Not only his work against the NCAA, but I believe he was also the U.S. Women's National Team Players Association attorney in their settlement with U.S. Soccer a couple of years ago, their equal pay lawsuit. So what is it that this group of athletes want that Kessler and the attorneys that are representing the athletes, like what specifically are their complaints? Is it about just like, hey, we want to be able to speak for ourselves and have the seat, or the things that they don't see or foresee happening in the actual nuts and bolts of the negotiations that they feel like they need to step up and represent themselves to get?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think like the actual, like, here's our 10 asks or here's our 5 asks is probably not even really hashed out. I think the one thing I will say is like the settlement does not cover everything. So like it brings about a mechanism for revenue sharing between schools and athletes. It has rules on roster limits that have been very controversial. It has rules on scholarships that would change things, but like it doesn't necessarily address like some health and safety concerns or some academic protections or like whatever it may be. So like while I think the women's athlete earning power and the sort of divide between male and female athletes earning power, even in the context of the House settlement, was on the list of issues that this group of women's basketball players brought forth and sent to the conferences and talked to me about. I think there's a lot also outside of the context of the settlement that really would be of interest as well. So like, it's not necessarily like we don't feel as if Jeff Kessler and Steve Berman and the plaintiffs' lawyers are representing us well, although I mean, I'm sure if you ask specific athletes, they might have, more nuanced opinions. Like, I think it's just like there's a lot of change going on that could affect a lot of athletes in a lot of different ways. And like for them to not have specific representation as that's unfolding is the problem. And like, you ask 10 people in college sports, you'll get 10 different opinions on whether the athlete should be sitting there or in what sense or in what, in what capacity, all those things. But like that, I think that is more the argument. There's a lot that falls outside of the settlement that has to get hashed out too.
Jesse Doherty, Washington Post, with us here on the Hoffman Show. Obviously, the history of women's athletes or female athletes being undervalued and women's sports being undervalued, long, painful, terrible in all the ways. And that is a part of this. There's a great quote at the very end of your story about this. But there's also just the reality in college sports in general that when it comes to revenue, there is football and there is everything else. How is this settlement and some of the issues at play here how much of it is about the fact that football is such a gigantic thing that I think a lot of people would say should just like literally be its own thing, different set of rules for football versus everyone else, versus the continued undervaluing of women's sports that we've seen from the NCAA and others for decades?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think if you believe that this settlement is doing right by athletes, at least in some ways, I think it's hard to ignore the fact that it is so lucrative in the back damage portion with that, over $2 billion. And the fact is the NCAA really only settled because they were afraid of the damages being even higher. Those big numbers only exist because of the value of football and because of the value of football contracts and because of athletes' inability in the past to share in the value of those football contracts. Like, that's how these numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger. And like, if this was a antitrust case about sort of NIL payments not paid out to men's soccer players, I'll stay in men's sports. Like, it wouldn't be so big financially, and conversely, it also probably wouldn't have the ability to create something like a new revenue sharing system. So, there are a lot of people who would say, well, that's fine. I mean, the free market's working as it should with the NIL market, and that's okay. And there are others who say, schools should be able to pay athletes and frankly should be, forced to, not just permitted. And that only is happening because of the prominence of football in our culture and how much of a moneymaker it is. Now, that does not mean that female athletes should be exploited for their labor on the other side. But I think the sort of key context here is that sort of there's so much money at stake, and the sort of potential for even more money being at stake is what's brought about sort of bigger systemic change as part of this settlement. Now, those are all sort of thorny arguments, because some people who maybe have been pushing for that systemic change for decades are some of the people who are also objecting to a lot of the terms of the House settlement. They don't like how it fixes prices with a salary cap. They don't like how it could take opportunities away from future female or walk-on male athletes. That there are things with it that even the most staunch pro athlete sort of advocates have really big issues with. So it's not all great for everyone. It's going to be really hard to get everyone to agree on anything, especially in a college sports landscape where, I'm going to pick random schools where like Alabama and Furman are under the same umbrella of rules at Division I. Like, it's never going to really make a ton of sense when that's the sort of start of the conversation. But you're right to point out that while there is exploitation of female athletes in this case, and then male athletes as well, like sort of the overarching theme of this is that like this is such a big business because of college football to begin with, and then from there sort of everything trickles down. So that's sort of really, really key context, I think, for all this.
Last couple of things here for Jesse Doherty of the Washington Post. First of all, Jesse, of all the random schools you could have picked, the fact that you picked Furman, a school that I grew up 30 minutes from and my dad in his retirement is currently taking classes at for funsies, that's a hell of a pull by you. How did you land on Furman?
I just was thinking big school, small school. That's it.
That's incredible. Funny. That is unbelievable. Excellent work out of you. And then the last actual thing here is obviously this collective wants representation at the table for this settlement. But as you said, this is all going to get hashed out over the next couple of months with that big July 1st date looming. And then there is the next 10 years and what happens to college sports. And with that, the shifting dynamics and the growing popularity of women's basketball specifically becomes even more under the microscope. As I tend to think, this is a personal opinion from a sports talk host who gives opinions all day, but like I think the men's and women's games are just going to go back and forth over the next 10 years based off where the stars are. If it's Juju versus Paige in the national championship game this year, there's a great chance that game outrates the men's game. If it's Cooper Flagg versus someone else, maybe it's the men's game, but like they are now much more on equal footing. And so what is the plan here going forward? And obviously the other part of this is college athletes. The athletes are always churning. It's hard to unionize. It's hard to establish any continuity because the athletes are, by nature of being college students, always churning. So how is this group thinking about beyond this settlement to the extent that they are thinking beyond this settlement?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the immediate plan is for more public pressure to try to get those meetings they initially sought out with these key college commissioners. And I think an important thing to note is that if you want to see in NCAA decision-making or college sports decision-making, like the best place you can go right now is the SEC and Big Ten. Like, they are driving the bus. They're meeting today in New Orleans where they're talking about college football playoff expansion, and that's a whole other radio hit, and maybe 10 radio hits to unpack why they're that powerful. But like, that is, as far as strategies go for who to talk to, that's pretty good. So when I did ask these women's basketball players, like, what's next, same thing you're asking me, like, they seem pretty intent on trying to get that meeting, trying to talk to these folks. And in order to do that, I think the plan is to sort of apply public pressure, maybe start telling some of these stories and illuminating these issues more publicly. I'm not positive what the tactics are going to be, but it might be similar to how you see sort of unions try to get their management's company attention when they're in bargaining or trying to get a fair contract. So that's sort of immediate. And I think the point you make about the longer term outlook is really, really important in that, like, I don't know what the long-term plan is, because these athletes who I talked to were largely juniors and seniors and grad students. And like you said, in a year or two, they'll now be either playing professionally or in the professional workforce doing something else. And it's hard to know, like, if the next group will be indoctrinated into that. Like as a labor organizer, that's what you hope for. And that's sort of a big part of it, is sort of the next generation being adopted into the cause. But, like you said, like, a lot of iterations of college athletes have sort of tried this, whether it's unionization or players associations, and it's obviously more prominent than ever, given that the athletes are finally getting paid. But it's not easy, and like, there's professional sports unions are strong in some cases when they have really, really strong and prominent veterans, but that still takes sort of some rookies and talented players and young quarterbacks or shortstops or whatever it may be to be involved too. So like, the strongest union has both, Max Scherzer, I'll use a baseball example, and Trey Turner, and that's because I knew for, working, on the Nationals beat for a long time, that those two guys were very union involved, and they were on very specific ends of their career. So that's hard to mimic in college sports. Even a freshman and senior is still pretty close together in age, and the lifespan of those players in the industry is not so long. So it is a really difficult challenge, I think, to continue that organizing, but that's, we'll see if it can be done.
Yeah, for sure. The power dynamics there, the fact that you're dealing with the old ones being 22 and the new ones being 18, there's just a lot of stuff that goes into it. All right, Jesse, we'll call you tomorrow about the college football playoff. I'm kidding. I'm not working tomorrow. Someone else might call you. Jesse, really appreciate the time, man. Good luck with everything you got going on, and thanks for all your reporting on this. This was great, and really appreciate your time talking about it here on the radio.
Yep, thanks a lot, Greg.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.
Appreciate you, Gregory.
That is the most normal end of an interview we've ever had.
Goodbye.
It's Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We are streaming live on YouTube, too, at the Team 980, where you see television and radios. Clinton Yates on a Wednesday, because I'm not here on Friday. That's how that's going this week. Clinton, of course, the host of Clinton and Friends nationally each and every morning. You can check that out on the ESPN radio app or on the ESPN app, because now y'all just have one app. One giant company, one singular app.
It's like one big refrigerator with one big freezer right next to it. That's how I like to think of it. Sure. In the garage. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, you can put it that you guys are in the house quality. Come on.
Yeah, but I don't like that much. I don't need that much machine in my house. You know what I'm saying? You got the beer fridge, and then you got the storage freezer.
Oh, no, you're saying the size, like
yes.
That's a garage size. Yeah, no, y'all. There's a lot of tentacles on the.
That's what I mean by that
ESPN
metaphor.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, now that we've got that straightened out, let's see if we can fix the NBA in the next 9 minutes or so.
Right.
I know you've been talking about this on your show, and there is the reality that the NBA is continued to grow in terms of the TV contract, so it's making more money than it ever has. But ratings are down. All-Star Weekend was pretty universally panned again. So for me, like, it comes down to the fact that there was so little basketball. Like, that was the thing that was incredibly frustrating, was like, I actually wanted to watch some of the basketball, from the Rising Stars to the actual game, and between commercials and other shenanigans, like, there was so little basketball. But, like, when you look at this problem, is this a All-Star Weekend problem? Is this an NBA problem? Is this a basketball problem?
These are two separate things, and I think one of them is a non-problem. The All-Star Weekend thing is a problem. Like, I would agree that the production on Sunday did not meet the level that it had been the previous 2 days. Friday and Saturday weren't that bad. But whatever that game was just completely sucked all the air out of the room. I was not impressed. I had it on, no sound, and I never felt compelled to turn the sound on. And that's not a good sign. You know what I'm saying? Because I saw too many people talking, too many performances, and I'm not some old fogey. You know what I mean? I just didn't want that at that stage.
I'll say,
of the
like,
weekend.
the Pass the Mic deal they did with E40 and Too Short, like, that was good. Like, if that was a singular halftime show, I'm fine with it. The problem was one of like 8 things, and the introductions take 30 minutes.
Yeah, I was not in the mood for the full dim sum course. I wanted one meal, and we got all of that stuff. So that's one issue. But the issue about NBA and its play as it relates to basketball as a whole, I think is a fascinating one, specifically that I wanted to talk to you, Craig, about, as you, a man of bodies and kinetic energy. And I mean this honestly, because there's a certain part of the American athlete that we have solved for the basketball player. Every player, effectively, somewhere between 6'5" and 7 foot, long and rangy, handles and can make a shot. The players themselves are all effectively the same guy, in a different way than it was 25 years ago, when different body types, different styles of humans, styles make fights, as they say in the boxing world, they were all a part of the melange. Because of the development of the American athlete, we've been kind of making the same type of person. And so now in the NBA, of course the game is all the same type of shots and the same type of things. All these guys are effectively the same NBA 2K creative player. So I don't blame the athletes themselves in terms of that element of strategy. Now, is there an element of effort that involves, like, NBA weekend? Sure, but I don't even really care about that. I just think that if you've watched basketball over the past 20 years at all levels, you could see this coming. 50,000 dudes named Jalen running around an AAU gym on a weekend, all with broccoli head haircuts. Of course, after those guys are making it to the league. These are the only people playing basketball anymore, to some degree. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I'm just saying that what we're doing with specialization, what we're doing with all of the AAUification of basketball, this is what it leads to at the top level in this particular country. And globally, that is mimicked, and you see what you see. This is not that surprising to me. The question is whether or not the core fan of NBA life, the NBA, still enjoys that. And I think that's a different question, Craig.
Well, the answer is going to be no, because people like personalities, right? People like things that are unique. Like, part of the reason Stephen Curry is so popular is because he's different. Like, it's like, oh, the 6'3" guy. But the same token doesn't have to be the 6'3" guy. It could be the 7'3" or more accurately 7'4" guy in Wemby. It's like, oh my God, look at this guy. It's part of it is the greatness, but part of it is the uniqueness of what they do. And this becomes a really interesting chicken and egg discussion of was it a bunch of 6'5" dudes named Jalen running around, or is that who the NBA decided that was the best thing? Like, they're searching for all of these guys that can play multiple positions defensively, that are good enough offensively, like can shoot it, create a little bit, are athletic slashers. And by the way, they're all trying to more or less play homogeneously. Yeah. Like, NBA basketball outside of a few select cities we're hunting layups and threes. And it mostly looks the same in how they're doing that, with some of the ball screen actions and the way they're defending those actions. Like, if you have a unicorn like Jokic, well, yeah, Denver's offense runs a little bit differently. Sometimes it's not that differently. It's just they invert some of the pieces. But even that is unique enough that's like, oh, this is different. This is fun. This is cool. Right. But I think, like, because not only from a strategy standpoint has it become an extremely homogenous game where you're not saying, okay, we have this incredibly unique talent, how do we maximize it? It is, we think this is the best way to play basketball. How do we fit the pieces into it? Then everyone's looking for the same exact kinds of pieces too, and that is probably not great for the game, because then you wind up reverse engineering those pieces at the youth levels, and everyone is so the same that they have the same name and the same haircut.
This was a problem in baseball. This is a problem across a fair amount of sports sometimes. Basketball is just more intimate. There's less players that are good at it at the top level. So if you don't get that variance in personalities, it's much easier to see. You know what I'm saying? But it boils down to this for me. The game has legitimately evolved. And that is something we do have to take seriously. Whether or not the style of play is one thing, is desirable is one thing. But, like, Craig, you know this as well as I do. Everybody can shoot in the NBA. Everybody. Shots go down. That was not the case 25 years ago. You did not have 15 effective dudes on a roster who could all get buckets. And, like, we talk about these funny bits where guys like Brian Scalabrine go face off against D3 college athletes who think they could beat him, and he smokes them 15 zap. And you're like, yo, man, that's the reality. The skill level is so much higher that if you don't change any of the other constraints, and frankly, officiating and things like that start to become more lenient towards people that are putting the ball in the bucket, you can't be mad at the basketball players. You can be mad about the attitude. And I tend to agree with you. There's only a certain amount of places that are not sort of doing the sort of money ballification of the game, and it's obvious. But to me, there's an inevitability about all this, Craig, that makes it very difficult for me to be mad at any single one person. This is just what basketball looks like now. And I know that because I've been watching it develop like this in front of my eyeballs, not just on TV,
right,
for 2 decades. You know, that's just
for
what
sure,
it is.
For sure. And I think that one, you're always going to have then guys stand out, right? Like, Luka becomes undeniable and he plays differently, right? And you have Jokic, and you're going to have like a Cooper Flag that comes in and you're like, oh, this dude can do all the other stuff that the other guys can do, but he does it better, and he's bigger and he's stronger. And, like, he'll be the next guy, and he'll be battling with Wemby for hopefully a decade and a half, who is 7'4" and unique. And there's a great quote. I don't know if you've started watching Court of Gold yet.
No, but I'm going to start. I've given a homework assignment to my radio team. We are getting on that. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we watched the first 2 episodes last night, and there's this great quote. I think it's in episode 2 from Wembanyama, where he goes, yeah, about 4 or 5 years ago, I stopped trying to fit in because I realized, like, that's not where I was going to be special. He was like, I was different, so I decided I was going to be different. And the way that he trains, the way that he treats his body, the way that he approaches the game is very, very different, and it works, obviously, tremendously well for him. And so there's always going to be outliers that are special and that can carry a team in a different way, and you hope that those talents land in a place that fosters them, that says this is different. But I think most people are going to try to chase that same thing. And, you know, that's what I wonder about a team like the Wizards. Like, they're saying, okay, we're going to chase big, long, athletic. We're going to chase positional size. We're going to chase athleticism. We're going to chase skills that are rare, and then see if we can develop the parts of the game that we know work. Like, from a strategy standpoint, I actually don't think that's a bad idea. But then how tweakable is that if you land Cooper Flag in 2025 2025 in the draft to say like, now we're going to take these skills that we've been building. We've told Alex Sarr, we don't give a rip if you shoot 18% from 3 this year. We want you to take them because we think eventually that's going to turn you into a 35% 3-point shooter. But then once it's time to win, are you able to craft the pieces into the right roles? And that's what makes a great basketball team, the pieces actually fitting together.
I also think there's an element of that speaks specifically to the district and the style of the game legitimately in terms of the years that we've seen. People talk all the time about how, the Wizards are garbage, DC's a bad basketball town. No, it's not. All right? But the basketball is not happening at the NBA level. The basketball happens all over the place from the youth level to the college level on men's and women's sides. Is that formula palatable to fans who know the difference in DC is a legitimate question. I hate to keep returning to John Wall. But the reason why he's so important is because he was such a unique actual basketball player that fans were willing to accept that maybe this team isn't going to lose or win a lot or necessarily break over whatever hurdles they can, but we like watching this human play basketball. Is that something that will ever be attainable again for the Wizards? I don't know. And those are the kind of special sauces that are very difficult. Your Ja Morants, you mentioned Jokic, you mentioned Wemby. People that look different in some ways are worth more than people that you can just assume are better from a different type of marketing standpoint if winning is not the only thing you've got in mind. And we know for some franchises, it's not.
Well, think about who's sold sneakers over the last decade, right? Like Kyrie Irving, the way that he plays is so unique and that's the thing, right? They call them signature shoes. Who has a distinctive signature? Yeah. Kyrie Irving does. Steph Curry does. LeBron James does. I don't know how successful Giannis's shoe has been. But like Giannis is the jumbo-sized, incredibly unique version of this player that we're talking about that can do a little bit of everything, for sure. But I also think, I'm glad you brought up the women's game. I think this is part of the growth of the women's game is the distinctness of styles of like Asia Wilson versus Caitlin Clark versus Kelsey Plum versus, obviously
a Juju Watkins or a Paige Beckers.
For sure. But like Fee is having her moment now as she goes and crushes it at Unrivaled, creates a league so she can dominate it. I think that is a huge factor in the women's game. And like, obviously, there's a million factors that go into Caitlin specifically's popularity, but she is having the Steph type of impact because we've literally never seen people shoot 30-footers in the women's game like this. Like, there is an undeniable base of basketball uniqueness and signature play that is the center of her popularity, even if there is then a bunch of branches off of that tree. And so I think that the fact that the women's game is still less homogenous, even though I think that there's more, like the coaching level is getting higher and higher and some of the strategies elevating as more money has gone on to that side of things. I think that is a huge factor and something that the NBA needs to find a way on a signature basis to get back to.
I totally agree. And here's the last thing I'll say about it. We talked a little bit about this on the show. I went to see UCLA versus USC. Juju Watkins was playing in that game at home. She went off, had 8 blocks from the guard position. If you would pay your cash money to walk into the building and look at these people do their thing with their eyeballs, you've got a good product. The winning and losing and who's on the shirt is one thing. That is for trolls on the internet. But if I were an executive in sports today, that would be my number one goal. Star power matters because the sporting is not something you're going to see everywhere. And if the personal experience can make you a different person when you leave than when you got there, that's your goal, and that's what's ultimately going to make you popular, well more than winning and losing, because in some towns, that just doesn't really matter, and that's fine by me,
Yeah. The caller that said that dunks should be worth 3, why do they have more of a point than I want them to?
I mean, dog, we've been talking about, who tweeted me back about that?
Who did?
The DA, David Aldridge, said he didn't hate it. That was a showstopper, Gregory, for me.
Yeah, for those that missed it, on Clinton and Friends, he had a caller that called in and said dunk should be worth 3. And I like that idea. Like, once I started thinking about it more, like we could have a whole 30-minute discussion on how that actually works. But on a baseline level of like, let's reorient the game towards the rim, don't hate it.
Don't hate it at all.
Don't hate it. Clinton and Friends mornings on ESPN Radio. Check it out there. Still obviously on television, writing for Anscape and ESPN.com. Bye, Clinton. All right, Anthony was listening intently to that conversation as a guy who's grown up in the DC hoops scene. We're going to chop it up more about the basketball of it all next. Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We're streaming live on YouTube, too, at the Team 980. Wrapping up the show, actually, in about 20 minutes because we got Georgetown Hoops tonight here on the station. But real quickly, Anthony, you were listening on the conversation with me and Clinton and me, if you want your proper grammar, as we were just making fun of the fact that kids don't want to do anything in school. I'll be a good example for the youths. The point is, Anthony, you were listening to that conversation about kind of the state of basketball, really in America, starting at the youth levels, and how that's infiltrated the NBA. And is that at the core of, the NBA's declining ratings and the attitude towards the All-Star game and all that kind of stuff? As someone who lives in that world, you do a lot of work for Capital Hoops and have over the years. You're around youth basketball. You came up in DC's youth basketball circuit not that long ago as a player. You didn't play in college or anything, but you played in high school, the whole deal. So, what did you make of those observations from, I guess Clinton and I now qualify as the two old guys if you're the other one in this conversation?
I'm not going to lie. So I was at a game yesterday. I went to go watch Carroll versus O'Connell at Archbishop Carroll. And some of the guys that Clinton was describing, the guys with the curly hair, fairly light skin, really like to shoot threes.
All named Jalen.
All named Jalen. They had three of those on one team. And actually, I was at the game with one of my best friends, and all he was screaming from the stands was, they want to shoot threes. And every time, one of those guys got the ball, what did they do? They end up shooting a three, end up making it. And that ultimately, helped them win the game. But the fact that, he's screaming that, he knows the scouting report. And I want to say that was his first or second time seeing O'Connell all season long. It's not like he goes to every O'Connell game.
Yeah.
So the fact that he had that read on those kinds of guys is just like very telling of where we are, in the basketball world. And it's I'm not going to say it's sad because it ultimately helped them win the game, but we see the game more and more.
It's not what the game was designed to be.
Yeah, it wasn't.
That's the thing is the game was designed geometrically to get to the rim. Before the 3-point line, back in the day, before I was born, I'm not that old, the point was to get as close to the basket as possible because that was going to be the easiest way to score, and every shot was worth 2 points. And then they decided to add this crazy 3-point line. There have been some pushes for it. The ABA has it. It's new. It's exciting. And in the first bunch of years of the NBA, when they added it, not a lot of guys took a lot of threes. It was much more of a novelty item. And now it was eventually, it was really like the Popovich and the Spurs, right? They figured out oh, this three is worth more than two. What happens if we shot more of those? And oh my God, if we make 33% of our threes, we get more points. Or if we shoot 34% of our threes, we get more points than if we make 50% of our twos. Cool. Let's do that. And then that coincides with Steph just breaking the entire geometry of the game in a way that was new and exciting and fun. And now what I think you're getting is this generation of kids that grew up watching Steph and Trey and these guys, but also Brooke Lopez, a big who's firing 30-footers. And so that's why the, jokes aside, when that caller called into Clinton's show and was like, what if we made a dunk worth 3 points? I was like, we're on to something here. Because it would change the dynamic of the game. Now, teams already hunt dunks and threes anyway, and free throws. Those are it's the most efficient way to score based off the percentages and everything. But generally speaking, if you could make it so that it was really extra worth it to get that dunk, to get that layup, to get something inside the paint, and reorient the game, how does that change the strategy? And I think that would be a very interesting thing to do. Or just how do you generally get the game to look like what we want basketball to be? Because while what we're watching is the strategy that we're watching, to your point, those kids shooting threes for Archbishop Carroll, they're trying to win the game. And sometimes, and this, it's funny because this actually just reminded me of another thing in terms of youth development. In certain countries, they ban keeping score. They do it some here, but they do it once you're 6. They're the kids are counting anyway. But in I think it's Denmark or Norway, one of the Nordic countries, they don't do it till you're 12, 13 because they don't want you focused on winning the game. And you're oh, that's loser talk. And it's no, it's teach you how to play talk. Because when you're 9, the way to win a basketball game is to throw the ball to the kid who's at his growth spurt first. That's not actually developing good basketball players or good basketball. And so you're always going to find ways to try to hack the rules and create a competitive advantage. And the problem is like the way that is best designed to strategically win, and thus the way players are trying to build themselves up so that they are appealing to future NBA general managers to try to actually win, is not the thing that people watching, the consumer, actually wants to see. And that mismatch of what the business wants and what the competitive side wants is eventually going to come to a head. And I don't really know when or how, but like that's kind of what you just described, is that all the way down at a high school basketball game of, yep, nope, you're going to shoot threes and it's ugly basketball, but that team won because they were good at it.
But how much of the blame can analytics get? Because I feel like that's ultimately why we are where we are now.
But all analytics is data. It's a fancy word to try to make fun of nerds.
Yeah, but the fact that, Mike D'Antoni, in the early to mid 2000s was just like, all right, we're going to shoot threes, and, because threes are going to count more than twos. And that actually ended up working for the Suns. They ended up working for the Rockets. It proved to be,
right, but like
very
at the
valuable.
same time in the 80s, without the 3-point line, or now the heavier 3-point line, your team's scoring in the 140s.
True.
So, like, I mean, the guy, it wasn't like as soon as they introduced the 3-point line, Kareem's scoring record went down. It took LeBron 20 years. And he's not even that great of a 3-point shooter. Like, he's had tremendous stretches and has obviously benefited a ton from the 3-point line. He's had way more 3-pointers than Kareem ever did. Mm-hmm. But, like, we are talking about, like, is there another way? Could you find a way to be so ruthlessly efficient from 2 that it's worth not taking as many threes? Like, eventually someone's going to figure something out. There will be a player that is worth it, that is so dominant. And maybe it's Wemby. Now, Wemby can shoot threes, which is what's terrifying. But maybe San Antonio builds an offense. It's like, if we can get Wemby standing next to the rim, he's unstoppable. We can score on such an obscenely high percentage of possessions that your 3 at 35% isn't enough to keep up with our 2 at 75%. So who knows? We'll see. Or they find a way to defend the 3 better and bring that percentage down. Like, there will be zigs and zags and adjustments and all that kind of stuff. But certainly right now there is a mismatch in what is effective to win basketball games and what teams are trying to do because of that, and what consumers actually want to see. And I think that infiltrates so many of our basketball discussions.
Last question. Do you want to take away the 3-point line?
No.
Okay, just making sure.
But I'm more open to it than I've ever been before.
I was about to say, it sounded like you were, Craig.
Like, no, I don't think at this point you do that. Like,
Okay.
We're not going to have a 40-point 3-point era from 1985 to 2025 or whatever it is. But, like, I do think it is worth remembering that they made that kind of – the 3-point line didn't exist, and all of a sudden one year it did. And, like, that kind of change in the NBA is not unprecedented. It's happened before. All right, when we get back, we'll quickly wrap things up with real things real people said into real microphones. Anthony, you know what just happened to me? I just got a big Friday feeling.
You got a big Friday what?
I got a big Friday feeling because I realized I got 6 minutes of talking left. And then next time I'll see everybody be in Indianapolis next Tuesday for the Combine.
Are you rubbing it in? Are you teasing me, sir?
No, neither. I'm just stating a fact about my life. You're allowed to go on vacation, and I'm not going to guilt trip you for it. Actually, I probably will because I think I have. I don't want to be a hypocrite. But next time, I'm not going to give you a hard time for it. I'm just going to be like, I want you to be happy, which is something I think I've also told you when you've left me. But I got a trip to Phoenix, and then I got a trip to Indianapolis. I'll be broadcasting from the NFL Combine during that trip to Indianapolis, so very much looking forward to that. As for the rest of the stuff, today, housekeeping. If you missed any part of the show, including our chat with JI Halsell on the NFL salary cap at 5 o'clock, chat with Jesse Doherty on his great story in the Post on the changing landscape of college sports, or our basketball discussion with Clinton Yates, it's all available in the podcast feed and soon will be available on demand on YouTube too at Craig Hoffman. You can also, of course, rewatch the entire live stream or fast forward, click around on demand style at the Team 980. Tomorrow and Friday, Linnell is in, so adjust the volume on your radios accordingly. And other than that, Anthony, anything else in particular that you guys got planned the next couple of days? Doc's in on Monday. Anything in plan, or you're just along for the ride?
Yeah, I'm just along for the ride, man, with the youngest in charge.
Yeah. Is there here's a fun one. Is there anything in particular you look forward to when I'm out? I know mostly you're like, oh boy, my whole day's changed. Different vibe. Not saying it's better or worse. You do. I think we enjoy working with each other. Is there anything you look forward to when I'm out? You're like, don't have to worry about that for Hoffman today.
I mean, Linnell can be unhinged sometimes, so I think there's some comedic, I guess, aspect to it. Not laughing at him, but more so just
with him.
Funny. Yeah, I guess.
No, because you're laughing at him.
Sometimes he thinks it's funny, though. Sometimes he does.
Sometimes it's a with him. Sometimes it's an at him.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
Because he really gets very, very, very passionate. And he calls you the Prince of Passion, but he's a.
That's the funniest thing to me. Like, most of his nicknames are terrible. There is none worse than me. He is a man who says, I am the youngest in charge. So youngest, you would think Prince. He is a man who literally cannot control his own passion for talking to a microphone about sports. And he calls me, someone who's probably the most level-headed sports talk host in the entire city, the Prince of Passion.
Yeah. So
I had look, we all explode sometimes. But I would say my holler rate, I don't know. Sheehan's pretty level.
Yeah.
Certainly not Chris Russell.
He can get up there, though.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
look,
yeah.
we all can.
Yeah.
We all can. All right. With that, it's time to close out this here edition of the show with real things real people said into real microphones.
Real things.
We're not going to be sucked this year.
Real people.
5-11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
The culture is actually damn good.
We take you live with KTLA TV in Los Angeles to the most dangerous intersection in the neighborhood.
We definitely have a...
See Hoover Street here. Officials say it's one of the most dangerous streets in all of Los Angeles. And now...
Yep. That was a live report on the most dangerous street in the neighborhood in Los Angeles in terms of car crashes. And during the report, there was a car crash, which was a hit and run, as one of the cars sped away.
That is actually so, like, the timing could have been more perfect.
It feels fake. As far as I know, it is real. Like, KTLA is real. That's a real station, the whole deal. It's the kind of thing local news reports on. It feels fake.
Yeah. Like it was staged or something, but it's real.
Speaking of real, if you haven't watched Court of Gold yet, the new documentary on the Summer Olympic basketball tournament, this moment from Kevin Durant, pretty special moment in the documentary.
We definitely have an advantage.
Oh, sorry,
We know
hold
each
on.
other.
This is not the serious moment. This is the funny Kevin Durant moment. There's a serious moment going around that's like really touching and genuine. This is a compare and contrast on the French team versus the USA team, and Evan Fournier is the voice you're about to hear talking about how the French, one of the advantage, not that they're better than the Americans, but an advantage they have is the continuity because they play together more often.
We definitely have an advantage. We know each other. We've played together for 10 plus years. We have training camps every summer. These guys don't. These guys just show up for 3 weeks and just go play, right? It's extremely hard to create a team and create chemistry like that. And I think that's their biggest disadvantage. And that's always a challenge for them.
I could play together every day for the last 5 years. That ain't gonna help you. That chemistry gonna help you when you got guard stuff. So whoever talking, man, especially French, man, just play the games, man. We ain't talking about y'all. We respecting what y'all doing over there, bro. Play the games, bro.
That's so funny. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Evan Fournier's right, but so is Kevin Durant. The biggest disadvantage the U.S. had is a lack of continuity. Steve Kerr, earlier in that documentary, said, we have to figure it out in 3 weeks. These other teams have been playing together for years. It's part of the reason some of these teams that, like, the gap between them is less than the talent gap. Doesn't matter when Steph Curry loses his mind. And spoiler alert, Steph Curry done lost his damn mind. And they probably edited it together that way. All right, that's our show. Linnell and the next couple. Good luck, Anthony. I'll see y'all next Tuesday from Indianapolis.